So the war in Ukraine is a war where the evolution of the front line is very slow. But recently, the Ukrainian salient in Russia, the Kursk salient, just collapsed abruptly. So the question that we want to answer is, what happened? And we will see that the answer, it has a lot to do with stuff that flies. Hi, welcome, I'm Gas, and this is Millennium 7. The operations in the Kursk area started on the 6th of August 2024, when Ukrainian forces attacked into Russian territory. They were facing a very small density of Russian forces, so they had the possibility to progress quite quickly. The Russians had intelligence that something was preparing, but failed to react in time. And I have to say, the Ukrainians moved very quickly and started with a relatively small concentration of forces. From a military point of view, we can say that the operation failed because no particular objective was conquered. There was the possibility to reach the town of Kursk. There was the possibility to occupy a nuclear power plant nearby, but none of those objectives were reached. I'm quite convinced that the entire operation was just a big public relation exercise to demonstrate to the Western allies that Ukraine could still conduct offensive operations and eventually win. The only real military utility of this operation was to distract Russian forces from other areas of the front line to react to the attack, but this did not happen, or it happened in very small quantities. The Russians at the time were on the offensive. They had been since the failure of the Ukrainian summer offensive in 2023, and their progress didn't slow particularly because the offensive in the Kursk sector was ongoing. Since then, the Russians have been recovering their territory slowly and progressively. It is also the area where those North Korean troops should have been employed in combat. But honestly, I have yet to see any convincing evidence that they were. The soldiers that have been shown and the images that we have seen from the Ukrainian side were not really convincing to me, but since a lot of sources say that is happening, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I'm digressing. So the Russians were making this slow progress, slow grind of the Ukrainian positions till a few days ago, when they executed the so-called Operation Potok. A force of about 600 men walked through a pipeline that was unused at the time, obviously. It is called the Urengoi-Pomari Uzhhorod. The Urengoi-Pomari-Uzhhorod pipeline that normally is used to pump gas through Ukraine and toward Europe. These 600 men walked for 15 kilometers inside the pipe and then came out behind the Ukrainian lines. In the first couple of days, the Ukrainian propaganda machine came out in full swing. They say that 80% of the Russian soldiers that came out of the pipeline died. Then they said that it was just a few patrols that were doing recce or sabotage missions in the area. Then they said that they knew that it was going to happen, but unfortunately they didn't have enough resources to blow up the pipeline because there was another attack, a diversionary attack, ongoing in other areas of the salient, which is frankly ridiculous, okay? And obviously propaganda and bias make the experience of navigating modern media sometimes quite frustrating. And to fix this problem, you need a tool like Ground News, which is sponsoring this video. Ground News is a website and an app that gathers related articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world in one place, so you can compare how different outlets cover the same subject. Every story comes with a clear breakdown of the political bias, credibility, ownership, and then headlines of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from three independent news monitoring organizations. So, for example, let's consider the story we are discussing now. Zelensky says troops not surrounded in Kursk. Russia says it retakes two villages. As you can see, it is a quite important story. It has been covered by 130 sources, which is quite a lot, and the bias distribution is such that the left has covered this story a bit more, but the right did not ignore it. However, to understand the difference of the left-leaning and the right-leaning coverage, this function, the bias comparison, is very useful. In fact, here I have a summary that tells stuff like this. The left underscored the difficult situation for Ukrainian troops, the potential for a Russian attack on the Sumy region, and the use of domestically produced long-range missile, while the right de-emphasized these points. There is no way you will understand these nuances if you don't use Ground News. Ground News is very important for my research since I try to be as factual and unbiased as I can about something that often is neither black nor white. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all the features. I think Ground News is doing a great job and I hope you'll check them out. Please support the people who support me. So, this operation actually caused in a couple of days a total collapse of the entire Ukrainian defensive system in the region. As I'm recording this, even the town of Suja have been occupied by the Russians, and there's basically nothing left of the salient. And the Russians have shown some signs that they would like to keep going into Ukrainian territory. So, don't you think that it is strange that in a war that moves so slowly, there was this sudden collapse? And this wasn't like the initial Ukrainian offensive, when there were very few Russian troops in the area. This was against a well-deployed and well-manned Ukrainian defensive arrangement. So, why did it happen? What changed? The reason why this war is slow-moving, has nothing to do with World War I. You can see this analogy in plenty of media, but the reasons why the war moves so slowly is completely different. It sort of looks like World War I from the outside, but it is totally different. The reason why the war is so slow is because the battlefield is transparent. There are intelligence gathering systems connected with medium and long-range weapons that create very effective long-range kill chains that could potentially hit every movement on the battlefield. So the connection between the use of drones and artillery creates one of these kill chains, but also the connection of drones with artillery rockets and, to a larger extent, ballistic missiles and long-range cruise missiles. Russian artillery has demonstrated in a few occasions that they have a reaction time of about 30 seconds if they have a drone in the air and they spot a target. Obviously, drones are absolutely pervasive, but they are not the only type of intelligence asset. Aircraft are not used for that because both sides' air defenses keep the sky clear, but there are radar systems, there are electronic intelligence systems, in some cases even sound is used to gather intelligence and integrate and fuse all the data to generate these very quick kill chains. The Russians have an enormous amount of electronic warfare and electronic intelligence systems. They have the superiority, but Ukraine also has some systems, and when they can use them, they have an impact on the battlefield. And we have seen a considerable number of videos of drones attacking isolated antennas, which are part of this intelligence gathering infrastructure. Anyway, to gather this intelligence, even though there are plenty of ground-based assets, it's cheaper and more effective and easier to put something in the air to gather this intelligence. Consider, for example, the Russian Orlan drone, which is a relatively small model aircraft, but relatively advanced in terms of intelligence gathering capability and the system that it is using, while the Ukrainians think that the Russians have 15 of them in flight on the whole of Ukraine at any given moment. Even the loitering munitions like the Lancet have this intelligence gathering capability before executing their attacks. Not to mention space-based assets. I mean, the Russians don't have many, but the United States has a lot, and till recently they were sharing liberally with Ukraine all the information that they could gather. The final result of this concentration of ISR is that the battlefield has become transparent. Everything that moves is tracked, and if you are moving a large group of vehicles or a large group of men, they are very easy to spot and they become targets. And when you concentrate men or vehicles, then they become a target that is important enough to attract a form of reaction. Could be artillery, could be loitering munition, could be rockets, could be anything, but every concentration of forces becomes a target. And guided weapons are so lethal that even a small number can inflict substantial damage. So far in the military, if you want to attack, one of the principles is to achieve local force superiority, that is, concentrate your forces. But in Ukraine, if you do that, you just attract fire. You just attract a reaction and you risk quite a lot. For example, the Russian attack on Vuhledar on February 2023 that ended up with a brigade of Marines almost destroyed. At the beginning of the Ukrainian offensive in the August of 2023, before the Ukrainians changed tactics, they ended up in the same situation and they had literally dozens and dozens and dozens of vehicles being destroyed by the Russian long-range fire. At the beginning of the operations against Avdiivka in February 2024, the Russians lost almost an entire division equivalent in the first few days just because they were concentrating their forces. So, in this environment, with this ubiquitous presence of fast-kill change supported mostly by drones, tactics had to evolve. And in fact, you don't see anymore, almost never, operations where there is a concentration of forces. Many say that the Russians are incapable today of conducting combined arms operations because, well, they just simply don't do that. And they also say that the Ukrainians are probably a bit better than the Russians, but they are not capable of doing that and so on. No, that's not the case. Combined arms operations executed like all the military schools taught till yesterday are destined to attract a hurricane of fire that will maul your forces into oblivion. So it is necessary to execute operations in small teams, and the numbers of the attackers is replaced by fire concentration, where different assets in dispersed position can all together concentrate the fire on a specific position, such that even a small team of people can successfully attack and clean a trench, clean a building, or anything like that. The obvious flip side is that it is impossible with such a small team from 5 to 10 men. Actually, in the Russian organization, the assault teams that operate in the trenches are composed by 3 men. With such a small team, you can't punch a hole in any defense and execute a penetration, even because any penetration in force will attract fire. And the situation is not getting better. It's not that movement is going to change anything. Because now that the genius is out of the bottle, everyone has understood how the future battlefield would look like. The United States, for example, are planning a constellation of about 2,000 satellites in low Earth orbit with the idea of covering the whole globe with radars, ground moving indicator radars, that will all be integrated in one single monster kill chain that won't leave any surveillance hole. If they manage to do that and it works, then pretty much there will be no place to hide. I personally doubt that it is really possible, but still will be a game changer from the point of view of the intelligence and the point of view of engaging the enemy assets in any given point of the theater of the operations. This is something that understandably they don't talk much about, but yes, it is in the making. Now, if you agree with me that this is the situation, how do you explain that in the Kursk salient we have just seen the Russian conduct offensive operations and execute what it is basically a big arrow offensive, as people like to say nowadays? Well, this happened because there was the pipeline, there was a tunnel that denied the Ukrainians any form of intelligence about what the Russians were doing. It worked because there was a covert path to the areas where the Russian could strike the back of the Ukrainian defenses. And with that, they forced the entire salient to collapse. So obviously, tunnels and pipelines are not scalable, are not a general solution, but it is an extremely good example of what might happen if you deny intelligence to the opponent. That is, these big arrow offensive, these large operations may happen only when A, there is no or very little opposition, but that's obvious, that's trivial. B, absence of intelligence and tactical and operational surprise becomes possible again. Russian manuals have always prescribed tactical surprise and operational surprise as something that a competent commander should achieve. But today in Ukraine, it is not possible. And this single time when indeed it was possible, well, look at the result. So here in the West, we talk a lot about air superiority, which is extremely important. It has obtained spectacular results in the past, but now there is another element. There is the intelligence superiority. You need to be capable of acquiring intelligence superiority by denying the opponent the capability of acquiring their own intelligence. Denying the opponents the use of drones, denying to the opponents the use of electronic intelligence and electronic warfare, by destroying them, by jamming them, or whatever. This is the key of the new battlefield. This is a new form of air power that, combined with ground power, has demonstrated to be absolutely more lethal than anything else we have seen so far in the history of modern warfare. Save maybe atomic weapons, but yeah, those don't count. To be fair, everybody now is actually rushing to deploy anti-drone measures of different kinds, but what I'm talking about is more along the lines of being able to deny the entire operations. I mean, point defense against drones is good, but by definition it will be small ranged, and it is probably easier to have a drone with long-range sensors than have a cost-effective ground-based defense capable of attacking drones. So if you want to combat and survive in the modern battlefield, you have to come up with a different and more radical solution than drone defense. Today everything is about air superiority, which is sensible because a fighter with precision-guided weapons in a single mission could destroy 3 or 4 enemy vehicles if it can fly unopposed. That is well and good, but it won't be enough. In the future, you will have to consider more and more this concept of intelligence superiority, or maybe better, intelligence collection superiority. Pretty sure that this will be a subject that will keep many military planners awake in the near future. And from this point of view, I have to say that the Russians, in their doctrine, probably saw this coming. They have this concept of no-contact warfare, that is, contact executed at long distance with various systems, that is almost 2 decades old. This is where the various Kinjal, Iskander, and all the plethora of cruise missiles are actually coming. It is because in the Russian doctrine, these are essential weapons for this non-contact warfare. And mind, there is a good portion of those that are actually ground-launched, because to use the air-launched ones, you need to have air superiority, which Ukraine has demonstrated that it is not guaranteed, because even moderately efficient, moderately modern ground-based air defenses are enough a danger for the aircraft to deny large portions of the airspace. And now, consider the possible, and I'm afraid to say very likely, conflict that is going to happen between the United States and some of their allies with China. So the United States could probably achieve with some effort the air superiority, but are you sure that you can achieve drone superiority against China? Think again. So thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you very much for having given me your attention. Sometimes I like doing these talks about conceptual problems. I hope it was interesting. A big thank you to all those who are supporting the channel financially on Patreon by being a member or by any of the other means available. I bring you all in my heart. And if you can't support the channel financially, which is perfectly fine, do it only if you can. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit like, hit the bell, because it really helps with the algorithm. And other people who may be interested will have the possibility of watching the video as well. So this is the end. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.